Clara walked along the path that cut through the dense forest, the sky beginning to darken, but the shadows of the trees seemed to devour the little light that remained. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something heavier, something metallic. She had heard the village whispers about the dangers of the forest at nightfall, but with her heart full of youth and recklessness, she paid them no mind. She never thought something like this could happen to her, a simple girl with simple dreams and a life still ahead of her. A cold wind chilled her face, forcing her to stop. A shiver ran down her spine as if something were watching her. She looked around, but the path remained empty. Nothing seemed out of place. Then she saw it, a figure at the end of the trail, emerging from the fog that formed just above the ground. The woman was tall, dressed in black, the fabric flowing as though alive, her long red hair cascading down her back like fire. But what was strange was her face. Her face was pale, almost lifeless, like a mask. "Are you all right, dear?" The woman's voice resonated in the air, soft but with a strange hypnotic tone. Clara hesitated, but she couldn't stop herself from approaching, drawn by something inexplicable deep inside her. The woman looked at her with a barely perceptible smile and extended her hand, as if waiting for Clara to take it. "Come, there is something I need to show you," the woman said, and Clara, without knowing why, complied. It wasn't that she couldn't leave, but there was something in the woman's eyes, something that made her feel as if her feet could move no other way. Without another word, the woman guided her to a dark clearing deep in the forest, further than Clara had ever ventured. When they arrived, Clara felt a pressure in the air, a density that seemed to wrap around her, making it harder to breathe. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of stones covered in black, viscous moss that seemed to move on its own, as if breathing. Around it, black candles burned, their flames not illuminating, but instead absorbing the light, tinting everything with a sickly dark red hue. The place was silent, except for the soft, distant murmurs Clara could not understand. What's happening?" Clara whispered, unable to stop the terror that was beginning to consume her. The woman looked at her, a barely perceptible smile on her lips. "It's a ritual," she replied softly, "and you will be the offering." A chill ran down Clara's spine when she heard those words, but something inside her kept her still. The witch raised her hands, and as if the shadows were answering her call, the candles began to flicker, and a thick fog rose from the ground, surrounding the entire circle. Clara tried to scream, to run, but her legs wouldn't move, and her throat closed, as if it were impossible to make a single sound. The woman began to chant words in a strange language, and the shadows around her seemed to come alive, spinning, leaping, as if dancing to the rhythm of a cursed spell. Clara felt her heart pounding violently in her chest, as if it wanted to escape her body. The air grew heavier, and something inside her began to burn. The witch walked around her, drawing symbols in the air with her hands, symbols Clara had never seen, but that tasted of death, of darkness. "Your sacrifice is necessary," the woman murmured, her voice now a whisper that seemed to echo throughout the clearing. "The power must be fed." Suddenly, Clara felt a deep pain in her chest, as if something was tearing her very life away. A scream got trapped in her throat as she watched the shadows move with purpose, drawing closer to her. The sensation of her soul being dragged by an invisible force made her want to give up, fall to the ground, and disappear. Clara's body trembled, her skin turned pale, and the air no longer flowed easily into her lungs. The woman took another step closer, her face now fully visible. What had once seemed a face of youthful beauty now showed skin wrinkled and worn, eyes dark and deeply sunken, as if they were empty of life, empty of humanity. She was an ancient figure, consumed by centuries of darkness. Clara understood then that she was not the victim of a simple ritual, but the price of an ancient pact. The shadows closed in on her, enveloping her, squeezing her body as her strength vanished. The witch's words became faster, more frantic, until finally, Clara saw everything turn black. In her last moments, Clara heard the echo of the witch's laughter, deep and cruel, as if celebrating the fall of a star. The ritual was complete. The witch looked down at Clara's body, and with a satisfied smile, vanished into the fog of the forest, leaving behind only the echo of a lost soul. Night had fallen quickly, wrapping the landscape in a thick layer of darkness. Leah walked along the same path she always took, crossing the forest toward her aunt's house on the hills. The village stories about the dangers of the woods seemed like nothing more than tales spun by frightened old folks, but something about this night made her feel uneasy. Perhaps it was the strange air, heavier, thicker than usual, or the sound of the leaves crunching underfoot that echoed unnervingly, as if someone were following her. Just before reaching the clearing, a chill ran down her spine. The wind stopped abruptly, and in its place, an absolute silence hung over her. The sounds of the forest faded as if nature itself had stopped breathing. Leah halted, looking around warily. It was then that she saw her. Standing at the edge of the path, the figure of a woman appeared like a shadow in the mist. Her black dress seemed to absorb the little moonlight that remained, and her red hair cascaded like fire over her shoulders. Her eyes, dark and deep, glowed with an unnatural intensity. Leah couldn't help but feel drawn to her. Something about the woman called to her, something she couldn't describe. The figure smiled softly, and the voice that emerged from her lips was gentle, hypnotic. "Are you lost, dear?" the woman asked, her tone soft, welcoming. Leah hesitated for a moment, glancing around. The road she knew so well now seemed unrecognizable, as if it had transformed into a strange, dangerous place. Despite the fear beginning to rise in her chest, something in the woman's voice soothed her, as if it were the only way to not feel so lost. "Yes. I don't know where I am," Leah murmured, feeling her voice tremble. The woman smiled, extending her hand toward Leah, who, as if hypnotized, accepted it. The strange woman led her through the forest, saying nothing more, only moving like a shadow, gliding without sound. Leah followed, despite the unsettling sensations creeping over her body. Finally, they arrived at a clearing where an old stone structure stood, surrounded by thick mist. The air was saturated with the stench of old earth, something metallic, something rotten. In the center of the clearing, a circle of black candles burned, casting a sinister light that barely illuminated the surroundings. The ground was covered with black moss that cracked under Leah's feet, as if something were feeding on it from below. The witch began to chant words in a strange language, and the air grew heavy with palpable tension, as if everything around her was breathing alongside her. Leah felt her legs grow heavier, as if something invisible was trapping them, immobilizing her. What are you doing?" she asked, her voice broken by the fear that was consuming her. The witch didn't answer. Instead, her eyes began to glow with an even stranger, almost inhuman intensity as she circled Leah, tracing symbols in the air with her hands. A biting cold began to take over Leah's body, and the shadows dancing around the circle seemed to move faster, closer to her. The witch, her lips curling into an enigmatic smile, looked at her. "Your sacrifice is necessary for the pact to be complete," she said, her words filled with a macabre calm. "The ritual must be fed, and you will be the final link." Leah tried to move her arms, her legs, but fear and paralysis took over. The symbols the witch was drawing in the air began to glow with a red light, casting distorted shadows on the ground that stretched and twisted as if they wanted to trap her. The witch, seeing her futile struggle, slowly advanced until she was standing before her. The woman moved closer, her eyes fixed on Leah's, and whispered, "There is no turning back." With surprising speed, the witch extended her hand, touching Leah's skin, which shuddered as she felt a scorching heat erupt from the contact. The witch closed her eyes for a moment, as if savoring the power that now began to course through her veins. Leah couldn't help but feel a deep horror when she saw the woman lean toward her neck. In an instant, the witch bit down hard, sinking her fangs into Leah's flesh, opening a deep wound. Leah tried to scream, but the sound came out muffled, trapped in her throat. The witch drank her blood hungrily, as if drinking the very essence of her being, and Leah felt her soul begin to fade as if it were melting into the shadows. The pain was unbearable, a pain that penetrated deep into her core, while the witch absorbed her, draining her of life. Leah's blood was the price the witch had to pay to stay young, to feed the pact she had made with the shadows. The young woman felt her strength fading, the darkness closing in, while the witch continued drinking, unstoppable. When the witch was finished, she lifted her head, and Leah collapsed to her knees on the ground, her body already cold and lifeless. The witch smiled in satisfaction, her eyes gleaming with insatiable hunger. In Leah's final breath, the only thing she could see was the witch's smile, a face that had ceased to be human, one filled with darkness and centuries of broken pacts. And then, everything faded. The ritual was complete. The moon shone faintly that night, as if trying to hide behind the dense clouds slowly drifting across the sky. Elena walked along the path that cut through the thick forest, just as she had done many times before. She had accepted the invitation without much thought, confident that nothing could go wrong. She was a young woman, eager to find some excitement in her monotonous life, something out of the ordinary, and the woman who had contacted her seemed so kind, so normal, that Elena didn't even suspect her true intentions. Aurelia, the red-haired woman, had found her during one of her walks through the village, crossing paths one afternoon while Elena strolled alone through the square. The witch had shown an unusual interest in her, something Elena had found flattering, even intriguing. "I invite you to my house on the hills, dear. It's a special place where deep stories are shared," Aurelia had said, her soft, captivating voice seeming to promise her more than just conversation. That same night, Elena made her way toward the house Aurelia had pointed out, unaware that she was already trapped in a web she would not escape. The first signs of something strange appeared when she entered the forest. With each step, the air grew thicker, heavier, as if the shadows were beginning to take shape. A cold wind sliced across her face, and the feeling of being watched started to overtake her. But it was too late to turn back. Upon reaching the house, Elena was greeted by the witch with a warm smile. "Welcome, dear," Aurelia said, inviting her inside. "You're in the perfect place to discover true magic." The young woman, unsuspecting, crossed the threshold and found herself in a cozy yet unsettling atmosphere. The house was filled with lit candles, casting shadows that seemed to move as if alive. The air smelled of dried herbs and something metallic, a peculiar mix that made Elena furrow her brow, but Aurelia reassured her with a smile. "Come, let's go to the garden. I want to show you something truly special," the witch said, guiding her toward a small garden behind the house. At first, everything seemed normal, but as they entered the garden, something shifted in the air. The candlelight flickered, and the air turned frigid. Elena began to feel uneasy, as if something terrible was about to happen. Aurelia led her to the center of the garden, where a circle of black stones surrounded an altar made of ancient wood. A strange energy floated in the air, and the atmosphere was thick with a sense of imminent danger. "You know, Elena," Aurelia said in a low, seductive voice, "this is a place where desires come true, a place where pacts are sealed and youth is sustained through sacrifice." It was at that moment that Elena realized what was happening. The woman standing before her was no mere sorceress. She was a witch, a creature who had made a dark pact, one that required human sacrifices. Before she could react, Aurelia raised a black dagger, its reflection gleaming in the candlelight. "Don't worry, dear. It will only take a moment," the witch murmured with a macabre smile. Elena tried to scream, but the sound was choked in her throat when Aurelia pushed her toward the altar. The witch pressed down on her wrist with an unexpected force, pinning her in place while her eyes gleamed with a dangerous hunger. Elena felt terror invade her, felt the air grow heavier, and the pressure on her chest almost suffocating her. Aurelia began to mutter words in an unknown language, and the circle of black stones glowed with a sinister light. The shadows in the garden writhed, as if coming to life, moving closer to the altar. The witch raised the dagger and with brutal speed slashed Elena's neck, causing blood to spill out. Elena felt the sharp pain like fire, but in that moment something awakened within her, a primal survival instinct. In a desperate move, Elena kicked the witch's leg, shoving her backward with all the strength born of desperation. Aurelia stumbled, surprised, and the dagger fell to the ground. Elena seized that split second of distraction to free herself, pushing away from the witch and collapsing to the ground. The pain was unbearable, but the fear of dying drove her to rise. The ritual was far from over, but the witch was no longer near, so Elena ran with all her might toward the house's entrance. The cold night air hit her as she crossed the threshold of the door and fled into the forest, not daring to look back. The fog thickened around her, and the sound of branches snapping underfoot only heightened her panic. Aurelia's footsteps soon followed, but Elena was already far ahead, weaving through the woods, stumbling over roots and branches, growing more exhausted with each step, but unable to stop. It was the sound of the wind and the darkness of the forest that accompanied her, until she saw the first lights of the village at the end of the path. Despite the terror gnawing at her and the deep wounds she felt, something inside kept her moving, as if each step took her further away from the witch's grasp. Finally, she reached the safety of the village, and with trembling legs and vision blurred by pain, she collapsed in front of a neighbor's house, who, seeing her, rushed to help. Elena would never forget Aurelia's face, the witch with cold eyes and a macabre smile, nor the pain of the ritual that almost ended her. From that night on, she never trusted kind invitations or dark forest paths. She knew she had escaped by a hair's breadth, but the memory of the ritual, the sensation of the dagger slicing through her skin, would haunt her forever. An echo, a constant reminder of what had almost been her end.